Today we heard the story of the call of Moses. You know, we tend to romanticize the story of Moses, the son of a Hebrew slave who was adopted by an Egyptian princess. And why not? Who would not be mesmerized by the story of a slave who grows up as an Egyptian prince and who later leaves the comfort of his royal status in order to liberate his fellow Hebrews? Hindi ba romantic yon? Well, today's first reading from the book of Exodus tells us how Moses realized early on in the story that the call which God was calling him to do was not romantic at all. You see, while it is difficult enough to defend the oppressed against their oppressors, it is even more difficult to defend them from each other. In the story, Moses immediately encounters a difficulty, not about fighting for the rights of the Hebrew slaves, but about the Hebrew slaves fighting with each other. Sila mismo naglalaban-laban. I find this part of the story less romantic and more realistic. I wonder if the late President Noynoy Aquino did not at some point begin to entertain some doubts about what his father Ninoy Aquino said or had said, that the Filipino is worth dying for. It is easier to defend the Filipinos from a common alien enemy than to defend them against each other. I imagine how Moses, in our reading today, may have felt exasperated or even disillusioned about the whole idea of working for the freedom of these hard-headed, deeply divided Hebrews. Parang tayo, no? So what did he do about it? The storyteller tells us Moses decided to run away from it all. He found his peace of mind in a place called Midian. Nag-asawa siya, nagkaanak siya, nagkatrabaho siya. He got employed as a shepherd by his own father-in-law, Jethro. And meaning he had found peace already. And he had made up his mind about working for his people's liberation until, of course, God disturbed him again by speaking to him from a burning bush. The unpleasant experience of being questioned by the very people he wanted to help may have made Moses think, are they worth it? Are they worth it? In the gospel, you know, parang ramdam ko na ganyan din yung feeling ni Jesus. A feeling of exasperation and disillusionment. He sounds like an ordinary human leader who feels burned out about his mission. You know, this is one of the rare instances in the Gospels where instead of uttering blessings, Jesus is uttering a series of curses on the towns where he spent much of his time. Sinumpa niya. Nakakapangilabot pakinggan tong gospel na to. Hindi mga pagpapala, kundi mga sumpa Sumpain kayo. He said, well, forget about Chorazin or forget about Tyre and Sidon. Wala tayong masyadong nalalaman sa ginawa ni Jesus sa mga lugar na yon. Pero nasa-shock ako talaga, honestly, about his angry words against the towns of Bethsaida and Capernaum. Bakit? Yung Bethsaida was the hometown of some of his closest disciples like Philip. And Capernaum, ay naku, parang second home na niya yan because of Simon Peter, who married a girl in Capernaum. Di ba, he healed his mother-in-law in Capernaum. Itong mga lugar na ito, these are the very places where Jesus did much of his mission of preaching, healing, and exorcising. Pero sinumpa niya, sumpain kayo. I remember reading a book a long time ago when I was still a student of theology. At ang title ng book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, by the Brazilian educator and philosopher Paulo Freire. Yung librong yon, that was the book that made me develop a more realistic view of the ministry and prevented me from romanticizing about the poor, which is a very common tendency, even in the church. Poverty is not romantic at all. When people are on a survival mode, they can also become oppressive and exploitative against each other. Some of them resort to criminality, stealing, selling illegal drugs. Some of them get involved in human trafficking, cyber pornography, etc. Some of them abuse their own wives and their children, making them beg in the streets while they engage in vices like drinking and gambling and even the use of illegal drugs. Nagpapalimos ang mga anak, nagtotoong eats sa bahay. Even Karl Marx had a vocabulary for this kind of consciousness. He called them the lumpen proletariat. Sabi nung kapatid ko, si Kuya Randy David, the culture of poverty always goes with the poverty of culture. What do you expect anyway when people are condemned to a hand-to-mouth existence? When they live a life deprived of the basic amenities, including food, decent housing, healthcare, and most of all, education. Paulo Freire says, inevitably, the oppressed will tend to imitate their own oppressors. Yung mga api, gagaya sa mga mang-aapi. This is expressed very well by the words of that character, Padre Florentino, in Jose Rizal's sequel to the Noli Me Tangere, El Filibusterismo. Merong isang dialogue line doon, kausap ni Padre Florentino, si Simon. Ang sabi niya, why independence if the slaves of today will be the tyrants of tomorrow? Para saan ang kalayaan kung ang mga alipin ngayon ay magiging mang-aapi bukas? It is precisely the reason why Jose Rizal did not believe that an armed revolution was enough to liberate us from colonial rule. He believed rather in what this author, Paulo Freire himself, would later call in another book, a sequel to his Pedagogy of the Oppressed, a cultural action for freedom. Ang sabi niya, the path to true freedom is a kind of education that liberates the mind. Ang daan sa tunay na kalayaan ay isang uri ng edukasyon na nagpapalaya ng isip ng tao.